Why did the room go quiet the moment she stepped into the clearing? The Navy SEALs didn't say it out loud at first. They didn't have to. The look said everything. The sideways glances, the brief smirks that faded into disbelief. She was small, too small. A teenager, maybe 16. White parka swallowing her frame. A braid over one shoulder stiff with ice. And the rifle old, heavy, wrong for someone like her. "You lost," someone muttered, half amused. She stopped 20 meters short of their perimeter, boots sinking into untouched snow. Her eyes moved over them calmly, not nervous, not impressed, just assessing. Lieutenant Garrett Thorne felt it before he understood it. That subtle wrongness, the way she stood too still, the way her hands rested on the rifle like they belonged there. "This is a military operation," he said, firm, controlled. "You need to leave." She tilted her head slightly, listening to something no one else could hear. "You have 90 seconds, she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Before 30 militia fighters close this valley." Laughter broke out, short, sharp, dismissive. Then she added, "Your extraction point is compromised. They've been tracking you since Boulder Creek." The laughter died. Thorne felt the cold move somewhere deeper than his skin. "How do you know that?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her parka slowly, deliberately, and placed a folded waterproof map on a rock. Hand-drawn, detailed, precise. "I've been watching them," she said, "since they killed my family." That was the first crack, the first hint of something heavy behind her eyes. Not grief, yet something tighter, more controlled. She turned to leave. 80 seconds later, gunfire erupted exactly where she said it would. And when the machine gun on the ridge went silent, when men started dropping one by one from distances no amateur could touch, Thorne understood the impossible truth. The girl they'd laughed at was the reason they were still alive. How does a teenager become the calmest person in a killing field? The ambush collapsed into chaos as the unseen shooter dismantled it piece by piece. Single shots, perfect spacing, no wasted movement. The militia panicked, firing at shadows. Thorne made the call he never thought he'd make. "Move now." They ran. And when the forest finally swallowed them, she was already there, appearing out of the snow like she'd been part of it all along. "My name is Ember Blackwood," she said. "I live here." She told them about her grandfather, about her father, about the commune that had refused to leave their land. "They came at dawn," she said. 43 people didn't make it out." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened around the rifle. "I ran," she admitted, "because my father told me to." There was no pride in it, only survival. She traced a new route on Thorne's map, safer, harder, unknown to outsiders. "We go this way," she said, "or you don't get out." Thorne looked at his injured man, at the terrain, at the girl who knew these mountains like they were part of her body. "Lead," he said. And she did. Through deadfall and crevasses, through cold that burned, through paths that didn't exist unless you knew where to step. When militia fighters fell into hidden ice gaps behind them, no one celebrated. Ember didn't look back. She only kept moving. What does it cost a child to become a weapon? The mining complex offered shelter, but not safety. Ember moved like someone who'd already accepted there was no going back. When she told them about the Russians, about the men training the militia, Thorne felt the situation darken. Professionals changed everything. Thermal imaging, discipline, patience. "They don't hunt like amateurs," Ember said. "They hunt like soldiers." When she volunteered to collapse the mine, to delay them, Thorne tried to stop her. "You're 17, he said. She met his eyes. "I've been alone in these mountains for 6 days, she replied. Age stopped meaning anything a while ago. She didn't cry when she talked about her father. She didn't rage when she spoke about the man who led the attack. Her grief had gone somewhere quieter, somewhere harder. "If I don't come back," she said, "tell them who we were." She disappeared into the dark carrying explosives, older than anyone in the room. And when the mountain came down, when the explosion echoed like judgment itself, Thorne counted seconds, knowing there were only two outcomes. She came back bleeding, shaking, alive. And emptier than before. How many times can someone survive before it changes them? The climb to the saddle broke, something open in everyone. Ice, vertical, unforgiving. Ember led, her movements precise despite exhaustion that hollowed her eyes. The seals followed because there was no other choice. They reached high ground just as radios crackled back to life. Extraction approved. For the first time since the massacre, Ember allowed herself to imagine a future, and it terrified her more than the fighting ever had. When the militia and Russians attacked, the mountain became a funnel of death. Ember fired until her hands shook, until numbers stopped meaning anything. She didn't feel brave. She felt necessary. When the helicopter arrived and she made her final shot, diving, firing, saving everyone aboard, she didn't feel victorious. She felt done. What happens after survival, when the noise finally stops? The mountains fell away beneath the helicopter. That's when Ember cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly like something finally loosening its grip. Thorne didn't interrupt. At the base, warmth felt wrong, clean clothes felt wrong, safety felt unreal. She asked about the bodies. They promised they'd be recovered. That mattered more than anything. Later, unable to sleep, she asked the question she'd been holding back. "I killed people," she said, "and I don't feel what I thought I would." Thorne didn't lie. "It stays with you," he said, "but it doesn't have to own you." She stared at the ceiling, thinking about her father's last words. Survive. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Ember didn't save them because she was fearless. She saved them because she refused to disappear. And long after the gunfire faded, that quiet refusal became the thing that endured. How did a girl who barely spoke above the wind become the one everyone followed without question? They moved because she moved. Not because she ordered them to. Not because anyone said her name out loud, but because in the chaos after the ambush, after bullets chewed bark and men bled into snow, she never hesitated. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She simply turned and began walking, already knowing where the ground would hold and where it would swallow you whole. Lieutenant Thorne realized it as he watched her back disappear between the trees. This wasn't courage. This was familiarity. The forest closed around them like a living thing. Snow thickened, light dimmed, sound changed. Ember lifted her hand once, fist closed, and 9 trained operators froze instantly, instincts answering before thought. She glanced back just long enough to see they were listening. "Step where I step," she said quietly. "If you do know why, don't ask, just do it." No one argued. The ground here was deceptive. A white sheet stretched smooth and inviting, hiding gaps that could swallow a man whole. Ember tested each step with the subtle pressure of her boot, feeling for the hollow give that meant death. She angled left when the direct route looked easier, ducked beneath fallen trunks instead of climbing over them, guided them through a maze that felt deliberately cruel. After 10 minutes, Dalton was breathing hard. After 20, Locke's injury slowed them more than anyone wanted to admit. Ember noticed without looking. She adjusted the pace. That small choice, unspoken, instinctive, settled something in Thorne's chest. Leaders noticed. Survivors adapted. This girl did both without seeming to try. They reached a shallow ravine, its sides iced over and sharp. Ember dropped into it without pause, sliding down on her heel and bracing with her free hand. She looked up. "Jump where I jumped," she said, "not a foot to either side." Merrick hesitated half a second too long. Ember's eyes flicked to him, not angry, just precise. Now. He jumped, landed hard, didn't ask questions afterward. They climbed out on the far side, breath fogging, muscles burning. Snow began falling harder, thick flakes blurring distance and sound. Ember adjusted her hood, braid disappearing beneath white fabric, until she looked less like a person and more like movement itself. "How far?" Thorne asked quietly when they paused behind a rock outcrop. "Mining complex," she replied. 90 minutes, maybe less if we're lucky." Luck, the word sounded wrong out here. As they moved again, the silence settled deeper. No radio chatter, no unnecessary motion. Only boots, breath, and the soft whisper of wind through pine needles frozen solid. That's when Thorne noticed something else. Ember never checked behind her. Not once. She trusted them to be there. What kind of loss teaches someone to stop looking back? They reached the deadfall zone as the light began to thin into late afternoon gray. Entire sections of forest lay flattened, trees snapped and tangled like broken bones beneath snow. Ember slowed, raising 2 fingers. "Careful now," she murmured. "This is where people die thinking the worst is over." She moved sideways, tracing an invisible path through chaos. Duck, step, pause, shift, wait, continue. Dalton slipped once, boot skidding on hidden ice. Ember's hand shot out and caught his sleeve before gravity finished the sentence. She didn't say anything, just redirected him 3 feet to the left. That silence carried more instruction than any shouted command. Stryker leaned close to Locke as they moved. How does she know? Locke grimaced through pain, because this place raised her. They'd gone another 30 minutes when Ember stopped abruptly and dropped to a knee, her head tilted, listening. Thorne crouched beside her. "What is it?" "Crevasse," she whispered. "Snow bridge 8 feet deep. Someone steps there, they don't come out." She pointed, not directly at the danger but at empty space beside it. "We go around, adds time." No one argued. Minutes later, a scream echoed behind them, short, sharp, and final, followed by frantic shouting. Ember didn't react. "They followed," she said. "They didn't listen." The forest swallowed the noise. They kept moving. When did survival stop feeling like a choice and start feeling like duty? The mining complex appeared slowly, like a memory emerging from fog. Rotting timber, rusted equipment, stone walls bowed but standing. "Shelter temporary, fragile." "Secure perimeter," Thorne ordered. Ember moved straight to the back, checking angles, lines of sight, paths of approach. She knelt behind old machinery and stared into the trees, rifle steady, breathing controlled. Her hands didn't shake. Thorne watched her for a moment longer than necessary. "How old were you," he asked quietly, "when your father taught you this?" She didn't look away from the scope. "When I could hold the rifle without crying," she replied. "So 8. That answer stayed with him. Inside, Kavanaugh worked on Locke's leg while the others set positions. The wind howled through gaps in the walls, carrying voices far away, too far to understand, close enough to feel. Ember opened a hidden cache with practiced ease. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. "My father planned for this place," she said. "Not for war, for winter, for emergencies." She hesitated, then added, "He didn't think he'd need it." The words landed heavy. Thorne stepped beside her. "You don't have to stay." She finally looked at him then, really looked. "If I stop," she said, "everything that happened ends with me. I won't let that be how it finishes." There was no anger in her voice, no drama. Only resolve. What happens when the enemy isn't reckless, but patient? The sound came first. Not shouting, not crashing. Footsteps controlled, measured. Ember stiffened. "Those aren't militia," she said. "They're trained." She pulled a small camera from her parka and showed Thorne images. Men in disciplined formation, carrying equipment too clean, too modern. Russians, she whispered. Contractors, they trained the militia. The man in charge, he led the attack on my home. Hatred flickered across her face for half a second, then vanished beneath something colder. They'll find us, she continued. Not fast, not loud, but they will. Thorne nodded slowly. Can we hold here? She shook her head. Not once they bring thermal clothes. The silence that followed was thick. Then Thorne asked the question that mattered. What would you do? Ember unfolded her hand-drawn map again, tracing a line toward a point marked only by memory. There's a mine, she said. Old, unstable. If it collapses, it blocks their approach. And how do we do that? She met his eyes. I do. He started to protest. She stopped him with a look that held 6 days of loss, hunger, cold, and relentless motion. This is what I'm good at now, she said. Let me use it. Thorne felt the weight of command press down hard. And then he nodded. What does it mean to trust someone who should never have been forced to grow up? As Ember prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway. If I don't come back, she said quietly, tell people what happened here, not just numbers, names. Thorne held her gaze. You're coming back. She gave a faint, almost smile. I hope you're right. Then she vanished into the snow. The forest swallowed her like it had swallowed everything else. And for the first time since the firefight began, Lieutenant Garrett Thorne felt something dangerously close to fear, not for his mission, not for his men, but for the child who carried all of it alone. The wind rose. Somewhere in the mountains, the ground waited, and the clock started counting down. How does a person walk into the dark knowing there may be no way back, and still keep their hands steady? The night swallowed Ember the moment she stepped beyond the broken stone wall of the mining structure. 1 second she was framed by shadow and fire-scarred timber. The next she was gone, absorbed by snow, wind, and memory. Lieutenant Thorne stood where she'd vanished longer than necessary, as if starring hard enough could keep her safe. It didn't. The mountains didn't care who you were waiting for. Inside the structure, the seals settled into the kind of tense stillness that only comes when time stretches thin. No one spoke louder than a whisper. Every sound outside felt closer than it should have been. Wind scraping rock, snow sliding from branches, distant movement that might have been nothing or everything. Kavanaugh checked lock again, fever climbing, skin too warm against the cold air. We're on borrowed time, he muttered. Thorne nodded. He already knew. Ember moved through the forest without light, without hesitation. Her breath was slow, measured, filtered through cloth the way her father had taught her years ago when she'd complained about the cold biting her lungs. Now the cold was familiar, almost comforting. Pain meant she was still alive. The mine entrance appeared exactly where it should, dark, jagged, half-buried beneath decades of collapse and snow. Timber supports leaned like tired men. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. She crouched, listening. Nothing. That didn't mean safe. Inside, the air was still, thick with old dust and silence. Ember flicked on a red-filtered light just long enough to orient herself. The cache sat untouched, exactly where her father had hidden it months ago while joking that he was planning too far ahead. She swallowed. The dynamite was old, dangerous, alive in a way that demanded respect. She handled it like something that could kill her if she let her guard slip for even a second. Support beams first, northern side, then east. She worked slowly, deliberately, thoughts narrowed to motion and memory. Every placement echoed her father's voice in her head. Check twice. Breathe. Never rush explosives. That's when the voice came from behind her. So the ghost is real. Her body went still, not frozen, not panicked. Still in the way predators become still when danger is close enough to breathe. Viktor Sokolov stood 10 feet away, rifle angled low but ready, scarred face, calm eyes, the kind of man who didn't waste movement or emotion. "You move well," he said, almost conversational. "I have been watching you." Ember turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. "You led the attack," she said. "Yes," no denial, no shame. "Your people refused to leave. Business became necessary." Something tightened in her chest, not rage. Rage burned too hot, this was colder, sharper. "You killed my father." Sokolov shrugged. He fought hard. The words landed like a slap. He studied her with something close to admiration. "You shoot like a professional. You think like one too. You could be more than this." "More than what?" she asked. "A survivor," he said. "A weapon." Her answer came without hesitation. "I'd rather die." His expression hardened, decision made. His hand moved toward the rifle. Ember's moved first. The knife left her hand the way it had left it thousands of times in practice. Clean. Perfect. It buried itself below his collarbone. Sokolov roared, gunfire exploding into stone inches from her head. She ran. The mind became a blur of turns and echoes. Her lungs burned. Blood pounded. Behind her, Sokolov's pursuit faltered, ragged breaths, uneven steps. She squeezed through the narrow escape crack, just as the timer in her head hit 0. The explosion tore the mountain open. Rock, fire, and history collapsed inward with a sound that felt older than language. Ember threw herself flat behind granite as the shockwave hit, knocking breath from her chest. Silence followed. Heavy, final. She lay there shaking, dust settling over her like ash. Alive. Again. The cost didn't come immediately. It waited. When the explosion echoed through the valley, the seals felt it in their bones. The ground shuddered. Snow fell from rafters. Somewhere deep beneath the mountain, something irreversible had happened. Thorne checked his watch, counted again. No movement. Then footsteps. Ember staggered into the structure, parka torn, face streaked with blood and dust. She looked smaller somehow, not weaker, just emptied. "It's done," she said hoarsely. "They'll have to reroute, thermals buried." Kavanaugh grabbed her before she could fall. As he treated cuts and forced water into her hands, Thorne listened to her report. Knife, gunfire, collapse. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't ask for praise. When she finished, she stared at nothing. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked quietly. No one answered immediately. Finally Thorne said, "You did what kept us alive." She nodded once. That was enough for now. What happens when the body survives, but the soul hasn't caught up yet? The Russians regrouped faster than Ember hoped. Movement spotted, disciplined, patient. "They'll come around," she said, "always do." Communications were still dead. The clock kept ticking. She unfolded her map again, fingers steady despite exhaustion. "There's a backup extraction point. Dangerous. Avalanche zone." Thorne didn't hesitate this time. "Lead." They moved before fear could catch up. The avalanche slope loomed white and silent, holding its breath like a loaded weapon. Ember raised her hand. "From here," she whispered, "absolute silence." Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. Halfway across, Locke slipped. Snow shifted, the mountain groaned. Ember felt it in her chest. They froze. Seconds stretched thin. Then the sound faded. The mountain allowed them passage. On the far side, Ember exhaled shakily for the first time. "I don't think I could have done that alone," she admitted softly. Thorne met her eyes. "You didn't." How much can one person carry before it finally breaks them? They reached higher ground as dawn hinted at the horizon. Radios crackled. A voice answered. Extraction approved. For the first time since the massacre, Ember felt the edge of something dangerous. Hope. It scared her more than bullets ever had. She sat against a rock, exhaustion finally winning, eyes closed for just a moment. When she opened them, enemy movement crept through the trees below. "They found us," she said calmly. Thorn checked his watch. 40 minutes. They prepared for the final stand. Ember lifted her rifle, settling into position with muscle memory older than grief. Whatever happened next, she would not run again. The mountain had taken enough from her. And as the first shapes began climbing toward them, she whispered something only she could hear. "I'm still here." What does a heart do when it's already been emptied, and the fight still isn't over? The first shot echoed wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp crack that snapped the thin morning air and made every nerve in Ember's body tighten at once. She felt it more than she heard it, the familiar vibration through bone and muscle, the quiet certainty of contact. One down. She shifted position before the echo faded, sliding her weight across frozen rock with practiced care. The ridge gave her a narrow view of the valley below, a ribbon of movement threading upward through trees and broken stone. Russians first, militia behind them, disciplined men using chaos as cover. Thorn moved behind her, low and steady. Wind. Crossing left to right, she murmured, weak, colds keeping it honest. He trusted that answer more than any instrument. Shots followed, controlled, intentional. Ember fired only when it mattered, when a leader exposed himself, when momentum threatened to build. Each squeeze of the trigger was clean, final, no rush, no anger. Below, the enemy slowed. Then adapted. "Sniper team splitting," she said. "They're probing." The weight in her chest grew heavier. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to inevitability. She, known it would come to this the moment she chose not to disappear into the mountains alone. She was tired. Her arms burned. Her eyes ached from strain and lack of sleep. Her thoughts drifted between the present and fragments of the past, her father's laugh, her mother's hands, the sound of boots at dawn. She pushed it all down. Focus was survival. A round snapped past her head, close enough to stir her braid. "Found me," she said calmly. Thorn swore under his breath. "Can you relocate?" She scanned quickly. Options narrowed, ice, drop-offs, exposed ground. "No," she said. "If I move, they rush you." The words hung there. Thorn understood exactly what she was offering. "Negative," he said firmly. She didn't argue. She just kept shooting. How do you protect others when you've already lost everything? The enemy fire intensified, coordinated now. Ember adjusted her breathing, slowing it deliberately, forcing calm where exhaustion screamed for release. She waited through lulls, letting others take shots, then reappeared just long enough to remind them she was still there. Every time she fired, the pressure eased on the seals below. She knew what that meant. Kavanaugh's voice crackled softly. "We're holding but not clean." Locke groaned somewhere behind cover. "Tell the kid to stop stealing the show." Ember almost smiled. Almost. A second round clipped her shoulder, hot and sharp. Pain flared, bright enough to threaten focus. She bit down hard, breath hissing through her teeth, and forced herself to stay still until the shaking stopped. "Don't rush. Don't react." She adjusted her sling with one hand and continued firing. Blood darkened the white fabric of her parka, blooming slowly like something alive. She felt distant from it, as if it belonged to someone else. Below, movement surged. "They're pushing," she said, "fast." Thorn crouched beside her. "Ember, we're not losing you today." She glanced at him, then really looked. Lines of exhaustion, dirt, fear he didn't bother hiding. "I don't get to choose that," she replied quietly. "I only get to choose what I do with the time." Before he could answer, a burst of fire forced him back. She took the shot that followed, leader exposed, command broken. The rush faltered again. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The radio crackled. 30 minutes, Thorne said, bird inbound. 30 minutes might as well have been a lifetime. When does bravery stop feeling noble and start feeling necessary? The mountain answered that question with a roar. An explosion tore through the trees below, enemy ordnance detonating against rock. Snow cascaded down the slope in a white curtain, threatening to turn deadly if disturbed. Ember felt the vibration through the ridge. Avalanche risk just went critical, she said, if they keep firing heavy. The crack of another explosion cut her off. The slope shifted. A deep rolling sound followed, not sudden, not sharp. Relentless. Move, Thorne shouted. They scrambled, boots slipping as the mountain began to slide. Snow surged downhill like a living thing, carrying rock and debris in its wake. Ember ran, then stopped. Below them, enemy fighters were caught in the open, scrambling too late. If the slide reached full release, it would take everyone, including the SEALs still repositioning behind her. Her mind raced, calculating angles, weight, sound. She turned and fired, 3 precise shots into a weakened cornice above the enemy path. The mountain answered. The avalanche broke early. Snow thundered down, swallowing the slope in a violent white rush. Trees snapped, shouts vanished. Ember was thrown off her feet as the shockwave hit, slamming her hard against rock. Her rifle skidded away. Breath left her body in a painful rush. She lay there stunned, ears ringing, chest refusing to cooperate. Thorne reached her first, hauling her up just as the slope settled into deadly silence. Below, nothing moved. The path was gone. The enemy was gone. Ember coughed, sucking in air like it was the first time she'd ever breathed. I didn't mean to, she rasped. Thorne shook his head. You stopped them. Her hands shook violently now, the adrenaline finally cracking. I didn't see their faces, she whispered. That's worse. Thorne didn't argue. What do you feel when the danger passes, but the weight remains? The waiting that followed was unbearable. No more shots, no more movement, just wind and distant rotors still far away. Ember sat with her back against stone, knees drawn in slightly, eyes unfocused. Her shoulder throbbed, her fingers were numb. Inside, something deeper ached. I keep thinking, she said quietly, voice barely carrying, that if I'd been faster that morning, maybe. She stopped herself, jaw clenched, breath unsteady. Thorne crouched beside her. That road doesn't lead anywhere good. She nodded, but the thought lingered anyway. Survivors' questions never needed permission. The radio crackled again. 10 minutes. Ember closed her eyes. 10 minutes meant hope. It also meant exposure. She stood slowly, ignoring the protest in her body, and retrieved her rifle. Just in case, she said. Thorne watched her take position again, smaller now, wounded, exhausted, and felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't what strength was supposed to look like. But it was real. And it was enough. As the first sound of rotors began to cut through the air, Ember whispered something under her breath. Not a prayer, not a curse. Just a promise. I didn't disappear. And for the first time since the massacre, she believed it. What happens when rescue is close enough to hear, but danger refuses to let go? The helicopter's rotors reached them before the aircraft itself, a distant thudding that vibrated through the ridge and into Ember's bones. The sound should have meant relief, safety, an ending. Instead, it tightened something in her chest. Birds inbound, Thorne said into the radio, voice steady but eyes scanning constantly. LZ is hot but holding. Ember lay prone again, cheek pressed to cold stone, rifle braced despite the tremor in her arms. The wind shifted with the rotor wash even before the helicopter crested the ridge line, and she adjusted instinctively, compensating without thinking. Hope was dangerous. Hope made people rush. Movement flickered below, too careful to be militia, too stubborn to be coincidence. "They're not all gone," Ember murmured. "A few pulled back before the slide." "How many?" Thorn asked. "Enough." The helicopter appeared at last, dark against the pale sky, banking wide to avoid the unstable slope. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, calm but tight. 2 minutes, we can't hover long." 2 minutes was nothing. 2 minutes was everything. Ember fired once, twice, pinning the movement, buying seconds. Each shot felt heavier than the last. Her shoulders screamed. Her vision narrowed at the edges. She told herself not to think about blood loss, about the way the cold was starting to feel less sharp. Below, a single figure broke cover, running hard toward a line of rocks that would give him a clean angle on the landing zone. Ember tracked him, breath slowing. Then the rifle clicked. Empty. For half a second, panic flared, hot and sudden. She forced it down, hands moving automatically to reload. But her fingers were slower now, stiffer. The man was almost in position. Thorn saw it at the same time. He rose to fire. Ember's rifle came up first. The shot took the man off his feet, just as he raised his weapon. Silence followed, thick and absolute. The helicopter dropped lower, snow exploding outward in blinding spirals. The SEALs moved fast, practiced, dragging lock between them. Ember stayed where she was, covering angles until the last possible second. "Ember," Thorn shouted over the roar. "Now." She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. For a terrifying moment, the ground tilted and the sky spun, and she thought, absurdly, that this was how it ended. Not in fire, not in glory, just her body deciding it was done. Hands grabbed her arms, strong, steady. Thorn hauled her up and half-carried, half-dragged her toward the aircraft. "You don't get to quit now," he grunted. "Not after all this." She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't quitting, that she'd never quit. But the words wouldn't come. The helicopter swallowed them in noise and motion. Doors slammed. The pilot pulled hard, lifting them away from the mountain just as the slope below shifted again, snow cascading in a slow, deadly sigh. The ridge fell away. The mountains shrank beneath them. And for the first time since the gunfire started days ago, Ember Blackwood was no longer responsible for anyone's survival but her own. Why does safety feel so unreal after you've lived too long without it? The medics worked quickly, voices calm, hands efficient. They cut away her parka, pressed gauze to her shoulder, checked her pupils. Ember stared at the ceiling of the helicopter, trying to match her breathing to the rhythm of the rotors. In. Out. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You're safe," one of the medics said gently, as if speaking to a frightened animal. "Safe." The word slid off her like water on stone. Thorn sat across from her, helmet off, eyes never leaving her face. He looked older now, or maybe just more honest. "You did good," he said quietly. She swallowed. "I didn't feel brave." He nodded. "Good. Brave is overrated." Her eyes closed despite her effort to keep them open. Images slipped through, snow turning red, her father's back as he pushed her toward the trees, the mine collapsing in thunder and fire. Her breath hitched. "I didn't save them," she whispered. "My family, I wasn't enough." Thorn leaned forward, voice firm but soft. "You survived because they wanted you to." Tears burned behind her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. "I don't know how to live with that." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "No one does at first." The helicopter banked, the mountains giving way to darker terrain, then lights distant, scattered, unreal. Ember drifted in and out, consciousness slipping like a loose thread. Each time she surfaced, the world felt quieter, less sharp. But the weight in her chest remained. What happens when the fight ends? and there's nothing left to distract you from the loss. The base was warm, too warm. The smell of antiseptic and metal made her stomach turn. She woke in a narrow bed with white sheets and machines humming softly nearby. For a moment, panic surged. Where was her rifle, her boots, the door? Then memory settled in. Safe, the word whispered again. A nurse noticed her stirring and smiled gently. You gave us a scare. Ember nodded faintly. Talking felt like work. Thorne visited later, standing awkwardly near the foot of the bed like a man unsure of his place. They're stable, he said. All of them, Locke going to keep his leg. Relief washed through her, sharp and sudden. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding that question. That's good, she murmured. He hesitated, then added, there will be questions, debriefs, people who want to understand how a 16-year-old outshot professionals in her own backyard. Her jaw tightened. I don't want to be a story, she said. I know. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and heavy at the same time. Viktor Sokolov is dead, Thorne said eventually. The collapse finished what the knife started. Ember closed her eyes. She waited for satisfaction, for relief. It didn't come. I thought it would feel different, she admitted, like something would be settled. Thorne shook his head. Closure's a myth, you just learn how to carry things. She opened her eyes again, studying the ceiling. I don't know who I am now, she said quietly. I was a daughter, a runner, a sniper. I don't know what comes next. Thorne's answer was simple. You get time. The idea felt foreign. Time without pursuit, without counting rounds or steps. Time to feel. That scared her more than the mountains ever had. Why does healing feel harder than survival? The days that followed blurred together, doctors, interviews, paperwork she barely listened to. People thanked her, praised her, called her extraordinary. She smiled politely and felt none of it land. At night the memories came. Not as nightmares, worse. As moments. Her father's hand squeezing hers once before letting go. The sound of snow collapsing. The look in Sokolov's eyes when he realized she wouldn't bend. She learned how to breathe through them, how to sit with the weight instead of fighting it. One evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the base windows, Thorne stopped by again. There's talk, he said carefully, about programs, support, maybe training if you ever wanted it, no pressure. She considered it. The idea of purpose tugged at her, but so did exhaustion. I don't want to become this, she said. I don't want my pain turned into a uniform. He nodded, that's fair. She watched the light fade. Lieutenant, she asked. Yes. Thank you for believing me from the start. He met her gaze. You never needed belief, just a chance. When he left, Ember lay back and listened to the quiet. For the first time in a long while, no one was hunting her. No one needed her to aim. The stillness felt fragile, uncertain. But it was hers. And somewhere beneath the grief and exhaustion, a small, stubborn thread of something else began to form. Not triumph. Not pride. Just the faint, unfamiliar shape of hope. What do you do with a life that continues after you've already said goodbye to everything? The mountains returned to Ember's dreams long after she left them behind. Not the gunfire, not the bodies, just the quiet moments, the way snow softened sound, the way breath turned visible in the cold. She woke before dawn most mornings, heart steady but alert, as if some part of her still expected to run. But there was nowhere to run now. The room at the base was small and clean, temporary, the kind of place meant for people passing through, not staying. Ember sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the familiar weight of responsibility to settle on her shoulders. It didn't. That absence felt heavier than any pack she'd carried through the mountains. They told her she could leave when she was ready, that arrangements had been made, that there were people Relatives, distant, careful, willing to take her in until things stabilized. Stabilized? As if life could ever return to something it had been before. She walked the perimeter of the base in the evenings, slow laps that grounded her in the present. Soldiers nodded politely, unsure how to treat the girl who had saved a platoon without ever wearing a uniform. Some looked at her with awe, others with discomfort. She understood both. One night, Lieutenant Thorne found her sitting on a bench near the fence, watching the sky darken. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said. She nodded, "I think so." He sat beside her, leaving space between them. "Do you know where you're going?" "Not really," she admitted. "Somewhere quiet, I hope." Silence settled comfortably. After a while she asked, "Does it ever stop feeling unfinished?" Thorne considered the question. "It gets lighter, not smaller, just easier to carry." She absorbed that. "I keep thinking," she said, "that if I don't keep moving, I'll fall apart." He smiled faintly. "Falling apart isn't the same as failing." She looked at her hands. They still bore faint scars, still capable, still hers. Why does peace feel so unfamiliar to those who have survived war? The morning she left, the sky was clear. No snow, no wind, it felt wrong. The transport vehicle waited by the gate, a civilian driver, no weapons, no urgency. Ember hesitated before climbing in. She turned back toward the base, toward the mountains hidden beyond it, toward the place where she'd learned who she was under pressure. Thorne stood a few steps behind her. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "Not explanations, not loyalty." She nodded, "I know." She hesitated, then added, "But I don't regret it." He met her eyes. "Neither do we." She climbed into the vehicle and watched the base recede through the window. It felt like leaving a part of herself behind, not the pain, but the version of her that knew exactly what to do next. The road stretched ahead, winding and ordinary. For the first time in weeks, no one was counting on her to watch the ridgeline. Her hands rested uselessly in her lap. What remains when the noise finally fades? Time passed differently after that. Days became quiet, predictable, too predictable at first. Ember stayed with relatives who spoke gently and avoided asking questions they didn't want answers to. She went back to school slowly, sitting in classrooms where the biggest problem was a forgotten assignment or a broken phone. It felt unreal. Her classmates looked at her like she was fragile, or worse, interesting. She kept her head down, braid over one shoulder, trying to blend into a world that hadn't been shaped by survival. At night she wrote. Not stories, lists, names, details she didn't want to forget. The mine, the ridge, the way the helicopter sounded before it appeared. Writing became a way of keeping things where they belonged, on the page, not in her chest. One afternoon, she received a letter. Not official, handwritten. From Thorne. He didn't talk about the mission. He talked about ordinary things, weather, a promotion he wasn't sure he wanted, the way the mountains looked different now. At the end, he wrote, "You did not disappear. You changed the outcome. That matters." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. It mattered more than any medal ever could have. Who are you allowed to become after surviving what should have ended you? Months passed. The nightmares softened. The constant edge dulled. Ember learned to sit in silence without scanning for exits. She learned that laughter didn't mean forgetting and that joy didn't erase grief. It lived beside it. One evening, while helping her younger cousin with homework, she realized something surprising. She was patient. Not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be. The realization startled her more than any firefight. Later that night, she stood outside watching the stars emerge one by one. The sky looked the same as it had over the mountains, vast, indifferent, beautiful. She thought about Viktor Sokolov, about the choice she'd made in the mine, about the line she'd drawn that she would never cross again. Survival had shaped her, but it did not own her. Why do the quiet choices matter most? Years later, people would ask about that mission. They would ask how it felt to be 16 and trusted with so much responsibility. They would look for a lesson sharp enough to quote. Ember never gave them what they wanted. She spoke instead about listening, about knowing when to move and when to stay still, about how strength didn't always announce itself. She talked about her family, about names. And when they pressed her, when they asked how she did it, she answered simply, "I didn't disappear." That was all. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand to be seen or celebrated. Sometimes dignity simply acts. And then it lives on, quietly, stubbornly, long after the noise has faded.